Now, it's not every day the Queen turns up at a cabinet meeting. And in fact, the last time it happened in peacetime was almost 250 years ago. It was a special visit to mark her Diamond Jubilee, and Downing Street said to thank her for her public service. But the historic moment didn't pass off without controversy, with some saying it was constitutionally inappropriate. Given that it's more than 2 centuries since the last monarch turned up to a cabinet meeting, it's not surprising the Prime Minister and his government wanted to make the best impression. Bows and curtsies from her ministers, who'd polished their shoes specially for the occasion. The Queen said little, though the state of the nation's finances was clearly preoccupying her.
I saw all the gold bars.
Yes.
Regrettably, some of these things they did belong to us.
Some of them were sold.
She asked the Chancellor about the gold bars she saw at the Bank of England last week. He replied that some of them had been sold. A dig perhaps at Gordon Brown's controversial decision to offload Britain's gold reserves. But Her Majesty wasn't going to have her political neutrality sullied. The first visitor to Cabinet since George III's reign was there as an observer, you understand. She did speak twice, though, once to joke that brevity should be the rule of thumb for the next Queen's speech, and before leaving to wish her government a happy Christmas. And it being the season of giving, not to mention the 60th anniversary of her accession to the throne, the Cabinet had a whip round. And this was what they came up with: 60 placemats, a gift suggested by Buckingham Palace. Hard to judge a monarch's personal taste, but no doubt indispensable for state banquets. The Foreign Secretary, though, had more grandiose plans.
It will be forever known as Queen Elizabeth Land, and this map illustrates where it is.
169,000 square miles of British Antarctica, named after the Queen. Now that's what to give the girl who has everything. Well, I'm joined now by Tony Benn, former Labour MP and Cabinet Minister, and Kate Williams, the author and royal historian. Tony Benn, given that the Queen is supposed to unify the nation, is there any danger, do you think, that attending Cabinet might somehow undermine her political neutrality?
Well, I presume this is a social visit, because the Queen's in a special position. She doesn't discuss politics, although she goes and has an audience with the Prime Minister every week. I mean, this Queen has spoken to, I think, is it 12 Prime Ministers over 60 years. So she has a lot of experience and knows what goes on, but she wouldn't give an opinion.
But do you think when she had this little chat with the Chancellor about the gold bars that, you know, she sailed a little bit close to the wind there?
Well, I think these are all rather formal questions. I mean, the thing about the monarchy, which nobody understands, is that the Queen does nothing herself at all. She doesn't dissolve Parliament, she doesn't summon Parliament, she doesn't appoint Prime Ministers, she doesn't enact legislation. And yet the Crown, as an institution, has got enormous power. For example, every member of Parliament on election has to swear an oath of allegiance to the Queen, and if he doesn't, he's fined £500 and there's a by-election to replace him. So it's a very strange phenomenon.
Well, Kate Williams, given the Queen's current popularity, do you think it's the case that her presence at the Cabinet today did more to benefit the government than to damage her political neutrality?
Well, you're right, Cathy. I mean, her popularity has been soaring this year. I mean, the popularity of the royal family is really as high as it had been since she came to the throne in 1952, so we've seen her popularity soar in 2012, whereas we've seen that of the coalition government rather plunge. And I think this kind of present to her in her Jubilee year, this kind of ceremonial visit, as Tony says, partly a social visit, was something that brings a lot of attention, of course, to the business of government, brings a lot of attention to David Cameron, and I think he is trying a little bit to grab a bit of her lustre.
Tony Benn, do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, Prime Ministers will look at everything in terms of whether it helps them or not. And I dare say the Prime Minister thinks that a picture of himself with the Queen in the Cabinet room would be an advantage. Whether it is or not, I doubt.
Well, it has been suggested in the past that the Queen could even be a bit of a lefty, for example, being concerned in the Thatcher era about, you know, too much, not enough being done to help alleviate poverty. Do you go along with that?
Well, I think her official position is she doesn't comment on politics, because if you take a contrary view to the Queen, what do? Who do you vote for? So it's a formal position. But, I mean, in terms of the popularity of the royal family, as you said, I think of the royal family as a sort of national soap opera. We all know about them, and we know about the children and the marriages and everything. And we have the royal family as such.
Kate, yes, I mean, Tony's right. I mean, the role of the Queen is to be politically neutral, and this one has perfected it. I mean, we have very little idea about what she thinks about anything. So when something is leaked, for example, Frank Gardner suggesting her thoughts about Abu Hamza, it is rather a moment, you know, as was suggested at the time. And her role is to be politically neutral, to not get involved in party politics, to go through her prime ministers. You know, she's had 12, began with Winston Churchill. And what interests me when you look through the different accounts of the prime ministers and their advisors is how they often tend to think that the Queen is on the other side. So a lot of the Tory prime ministers have thought she's rather too left-wing. As you say, Mrs Thatcher thought she was meddling a little bit in considering about the poor, and indeed Mrs Thatcher said that the Queen is the type of woman to vote SDP, which is obviously beyond the pale. And Labour prime ministers have thought perhaps she's a rather too right-wing. And I wonder whether this is because, of course, we don't know what happens in these private audiences between the prime minister and the Queen. Every week they have to occur, no matter how busy the prime minister is. But I wonder whether sometimes the Queen kind of puts the opposite idea, plays a little bit of a devil's advocate, and to an extent I think she does see herself as the voice of her people. I mean, that's how she sees herself. I'm not sure.
So she reflects the nation.
I think she feels she does, because she tours, she meets many people. Of course, people write to her. A little pupil wrote to her last year who didn't get into his first choice school, and she passed the letter to Michael Gove. So people may disagree with her view of that, but I think that's what she thinks she does. So she takes her responsibility to advise and counsel very seriously.
But unlike her son, she doesn't write to ministers. I mean, a lot of Labour ministers have...
No, that is a bit strange. Mind you, looking at the Cabinet, I do think very strongly the Cabinet minutes should be published. Parliament's published, so you know what's discussed in Parliament, and yet the decisions are made in Cabinet. And I think if we knew what was discussed in Cabinet and who said what, it would enormously inform the public, and they would be able to reach a much clearer view when they vote.
Particularly today's Cabinet. But do you think she was at home today, given that, you know, Sherry Blair didn't want to curtsy to her? Would she feel more comfortable with the Tories and even the Lib Dems around the table?
Obviously, it all looked rather chummy, didn't it? I mean, it all looked rather friendly and chummy. And as Tony says, I mean, we don't know what goes on in Cabinet meetings. Indeed, MPs don't know. It's really only the ministers who know, and of course, the Queen sees the minutes, and we don't exactly know what happens there. And I think it all looked rather friendly, and of course, they gave her this present. You know, there was some debate at the beginning of the year of giving her a yacht. I think this one was rather more welcome to a recession-hit Britain, placemats rather than a yacht. And now she's got a bit of the Antarctic as well. I mean, she already does have a bit of the Antarctic, the Australian Antarctic, that was named after her in 1931, but this is a bit more.
Kate Williams, Tony Benn, thank you very much for joining me.